I want to begin by giving thanks for this earth, for her creatures, for her waters, for our very atmosphere, and for the land that really supports all of life. And as I put in the chat stream, I live in the unceded territories of the Tewa, and I live in the greater watershed of the Rio Grande Valley. And this river is called Intewa Posoge. And you might notice in the blur of the background, I'm in a cabin. I'm up at 9,400 feet at Prajna Mountain Forest Refuge, surrounded by 3 million acres of national forest. And I feel so grateful to be able to spend time practicing and serving in the natural world. And I think, like many of you, I stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples and people of color. And I also feel it's important that all of us acknowledge those who are fleeing war and the effects of this climate catastrophe. And this group of people whom I've just mentioned will experience disproportionately the burden of climate devastation. But I also am clear that no one will be ultimately protected from what's happening, the profound changes that are happening on this earth at this time. And I have to offer gratitude to our faculty, these powerful women who are doing root work in bringing social justice issues in relation to our climate catastrophe. So I want to acknowledge the social and environmental activists. I also want to deeply acknowledge as well the scientists, and on those governments who are endeavoring to dial down this climate catastrophe. But most especially, I want to honor the earth-cherishing peoples who are taking a stand in relation to protecting and restoring the health of our Mother Earth. So we have gathered here to learn. We've gathered to be a community together. We want to stand together in solidarity in relation to what has happened somehow. Thank you, Noah. We want to really stand in solidarity, particularly with those who are most affected by the climate catastrophe. And we will hear from these prophetic women, as I said, who are doing on the ground work in this area of climate and justice. And I'm so grateful. The first teaching today will be given by Heather Mcteer Toney. And I have to say, I met Heather a year and a half ago when we were together in Washington, D.C. with Jane Fonda, protesting in front of our nation's capital. And I felt this immediate resonance with Heather. You've seen photographs probably of us together with Jane and others. And it was just so serendipitous that we had the opportunity to connect at that time. So I could bring, Heather into the Upaya mandala to share the extraordinary work that she does as a climate justice liaison, particularly in relation to the Environmental Defense Fund. But I also want to say she's a self-proclaimed recovering politician who served as the regional administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency, the Southeast region under Barack Obama. And she was the youngest and a two-term mayor of Greenville, Mississippi. And she shares her work and her knowledge internationally in relation to exactly what we're focusing on today, and that is climate and justice. So my dear Heather, thank you, and away you go.
Thank you so much, Roshi Joan. I'm hopeful that everyone can hear me and that the internet is working. I'm actually out of the country at the moment. And believe it or not, up until this point, the internet was working perfectly fine.
Yeah,
And
there you
now
are.
it's a little wonky. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, okay, good. Hopefully we will be able to hang in here. I've got a backup coming here, just a moment, just in case we have some more internet issues. But hopefully we'll be able to stay on without any problems. First, thank you so much, Roshi Joan, for having me and for continuing to bring together a collective of people to really deeply understand the impacts of environmental justice and the climate crisis, and why it's so important for us to dig into the elements of justice and the solutions that come along with it. It's very important for all of us to understand equity and the reasons why this is necessary in order for us to come to sound climate solutions. If we don't do this in this time frame, then we're at risk of not only not meeting the targets that we have, but even more deeply damaging and disturbing this earth and environment that we call home. And so it's not just for any singular one of us that we do this, but it's for the collective. And I'm very glad and very proud to be a part of this work. I want to start all of us today. I know there's been a morning of meditation, but I'd like for all of us to start with one small exercise, and I think it'll guide us for the rest of this conversation. And so if you have a pen or a paper next to you, I would like you to write down very, very briefly who, who do you trust? Okay. It can be more than one person. Um, it could be multiple people, but write down who you trust. Okay. Take just a moment to write down who do you trust. While you're writing down, I'm going to grab my other hotspot real quick. After you've written who is in person, people, who you trust, I'd like you to write what do you trust? What do you trust? And that can be different from all of us. It can be elements of our faith, it could be elements of our community, but write what do you trust? Take a moment um, and write that down. As you've done that, as you look at that piece of paper or wherever you have written or notated what it is that you trust, who it is that you trust. We're looking at two things. We're looking at people and we're looking at systems. People that we trust and we rely upon, as well as the systems in which we operate in. And the two together give us the basis of why and what are the issues that we deal with respect to social justice. And that's the theme of our conversation for today. You cannot have true social justice without building trust. And trust is the core of why we are experiencing many of the issues that we're having today. They're steeped in mistrust. And we're at this crossroads of trying to figure out how do we rebuild and at the same time truly establish social justice with respect to our people, our systems, which include our ecosystems and environment, in order to come to solutions that are of the benefit of all of us. You know, racial injustice and social justice is a reflection of, I have shared with you, and Roshi Joan has done such a beautiful introduction. I come from the state of Mississippi. I am a Mississippi native, and I saw many people who I was noting in the chat saw that they were from like the Memphis area and some places around where our native territory is the indigenous lands of the Chickasaw people. I'm from the Delta, which is the indigenous lands of the Choctaw people. And when we think even of our indigenous communities and the way in which we have connected to people and systems, from the very beginning, it was mistrust. This trust that we had on new people that were coming to this space, this geography that we now know, America, North America, but steeped in mistrust were the elements that began to dismantle an entire culture that we know as indigenous people. Indigenous people who had the wisdom and the wherewithal to not only care for the earth, but it was a part of their natural and cultural element and connection. And mistrust is the space that began to dismantle that system, people and the systems, the who and the what. And we look at that as just a beginning point, even as we stretch forward into the enslavement of Africans being brought transatlantic from the continent to North America, to the Caribbean, the African diaspora, that element once again of mistrust. Placing African Americans now in a space where for years there has been a struggle for equality, for justice, steeped in this mistrust. And even today, when we think about our Latino brothers and sisters who are dealing constantly with issues of immigration, many fleeing from climate-related catastrophe, spaces where it is no longer safe to drink the water, spaces where water no longer exists, places where there are extreme weather events that take place at a rate that is more rapid and harsher than anything that anyone has ever experienced before. The very ability to live in a place such that they now have to flee and we are unable to accept them is steeped in mistrust. So all of the different dynamics that make up the really basis of social justice movements have to do with our own ability to trust one another and to trust our systems to do the basic things of humanity, understanding one another, deeply listening to one another. And without this idea of how we change and shift the narrative around how we collectively work with one another, we will be unable to meet the needs of the climate crisis. And you say, well, Heather, how do you say that? Why do you say that? Why is, in climate crisis? I'll tell you why. Indigenous populations on this planet, in our globe, make up 80% of the populations that are in direct connection with biodiverse ecosystems on our planet. What does that mean? It means 80% of the people who are in direct connection with different diverse systems, ecosystems, our oceans, our lands, are indigenous communities. And so if we have not identified and understand the importance of equity and listening deeply and valuing indigenous communities that again are 80% of the people who are in direct connection, they're on the front lines, they are giving us the warnings of what's going to happen. But unfortunately, we have not trusted them enough to understand that there are red flags waving to say what's going to happen. And that comes once again from years of not valuing, of mistrusting, and not recognizing the importance of social justice when it comes to the connection to environment. So the people who live indigenously in the Amazon communities, who are on the front lines and know exactly what it means when they see the shifts in their water quality, when they see the trees that are burning in their own communities, and when their own health is impacted, that to us is a warning sign of what will come if we do not value and pay attention to what the people on the front lines are dealing with. It is a direct line and connection of value and trust. Just because they look differently, their experiences are different, or they have not been in the upper echelons of capitalism and how we think about success, does not mean they do not have the wisdom, the creativity, and the ingenuity to help us understand the solutions that are necessary in order to see success when it comes to meeting this climate crisis. That's for one. The second reason that we have to understand why social justice and, again, developing this trust, reconnecting this trust in our humanity, is because we have to have solutions that we think of are culturally competent. Culturally competent solutions means solutions that people can accept and implement in their own communities. It's the very idea of dismantling systems of racism that have prevented people from being able to have access to many of the things that a lot of us enjoy. So when we tell people in an urban community, urban Black community, maybe a marginalized or an impoverished community, that you've got to take care of the climate, you should eat more vegetables, you should go vegan, maybe you should plant a garden in your backyard, we should not be surprised when they tell us, how am I going to do that when I don't own the property? How do I do that when historic and systemic racist housing policies have not allowed me to live in a place where I have access to clean land and clean water? How do I do that when the very systems that have allowed some people to have access to credit and to owning their own property have prevented me from doing that? It is the idea of reversing what we are putting onto people who are the victims of these policies, but then demanding that they are the very ones who come up with the solutions to this our global problem. So we have to understand that that identity, that issue of social justice is critical to really having solutions that are helping us to not only dismantle racist systems, but at the same time come up with climate solutions that are helpful to everyone. I'm going to stop for just a moment just to connect and make sure that that you're able to get everything, or you're hearing everything, because I know sometimes the internet is okay. Roshi, I see your thumbs up, so I'm taking it that everything is okay. Okay, good. We'll keep going. We'll keep going. So, these are things that, again, when we're thinking about long-term climate solutions and we're thinking about how do we connect, what are these problems, and why does this issue of racial injustice and social justice keep coming up if we're just trying to save the planet? It's because in order to do that, we have to have the buy-in from everybody who's on the planet. In order to do things that are effective in the time frame in which we need to do them, because let's all know that the International Panel on Climate, that's all of the world's biggest brains and scientists who have told us about how much longer we have to get this right. They've all told us we've got roughly 10 to 15 years. And so now we cannot afford to not be inclusive. We cannot afford, for the sake of our environment, the sake of our communities, and for the sake of our children, we can't afford this exclusivity that we've been privileged to have. Now we must take into account people, systems, and our future. And it goes back to those ideas of trust. And so one of the things that I often get asked is, Heather, as we're working on climate justice and environmental justice, how do we get people to know that we're cool? It's okay. We're really working on this together. Well, I want you to go back to that list that you wrote of the people you trust. Why? Look at that list. Why do you trust those names that you put on that list. For me, I trust the names that are on my personal list because at some point in my life, they have proven themselves to be trustworthy. Whether it is making sure that I am taken care of or cared for in a way that is meeting my needs, my partner, my husband, my spouse, I trust him to do that because he does it time and time again. And I can depend upon the fact that he's going to be the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He's not going to change. He's been very consistent, and I trust that. Um, think of why you trust the people that you trust. Okay. And I want you to think about the why on the what you trust. Because I asked you to two things: the who you trust and the what you trust. And I want you to ask yourself that same question. Why do I trust what I trust? I trust in terms of what I will use the system of my faith. I'm a Christian and have been for years. And we even have laughed about sort of the spirituality and the variety and diversity of our faith. But I trust my faith because, again, it's been consistent in my life personally. My spirituality has grown and it has shown me that the faith that I put in and the energy that I put out, it returns to me. The God that I acknowledge and serve in capacity with all others is the same yesterday, today, tomorrow, is the same of my grandmother, my great grandmother, my ancestral line of people. It has been consistent. So I can put my faith into the fact that it's not going to change. Part of the reason that today we have such an issue with coming together in terms of racial equity and moving past issues is because the trust has not been proven. When Black folks look back through their history back to 1619 and looking at how there have been struggles for civil rights, be it for education, for healthcare, for housing, for climate and environment, not being located next to landfills, having access to clean and healthy water, not having your neighborhood split apart by a highway because of urban renewal and transportation. The very systems that have claimed to be helpful for all, we have not been able to trust as being helpful to us. And so in this new space that we've all found ourselves in post-COVID, post-George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, really this reckoning with racial injustice within the United States, but also reflective of what is happening around our globe, we come back to the issue of you're saying something different, but can I really trust you? Can I really trust you this time to do the right thing? Can I really trust you when you say it's going to be equitable? What does that mean for me? Because history has told me now that what you have done, and I mean you collectively in terms of systems of government, has not been trustworthy. You know, there's a saying, to do the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different result is the definition of insanity. Moms Mabley, a Black comedian, say, do the same thing over and over again, expect something different, you're just crazy. And so that in and of itself has been an issue that people of color have been grappling with because we've been asked to trust again. And we have said you cannot have social justice until trust is rebuilt. That's why there's such a significant difference right now, is because there is a demand on our entire global population to rebuild the trust. Rebuild the trust with our indigenous communities as they are fighting right now in Minnesota to stop line 3. You have indigenous elders that are on the front line of stopping an oil and gas pipeline that is coming through their own indigenous communities that they live on, fish on, and have been part of their culture for generations. Right now, they're saying, even in the midst of this new administration, all of these new things that we're talking about, can we trust you? We don't know, because right now our elders are chained to equipment in order for us to ensure, and we're not willing to give up. That is the elements that we're dealing with right now, saying one thing and doing something else. Can we trust? And even bringing it back personally to the who is where it comes to the human level of where we individually interact with the social justice process and network. Can you be trusted in the same way that you are trusting the people that you wrote down on your paper? And you should stop for a moment and let's just sit in that and think about it just for a moment. The reason that I ask that you sit and think in it for a moment is because all too often we want to rush past it. We want to push past that hard part, pushing past questioning whether or not, even in and of ourselves, we are willing to put out the same thing that, and when it comes to climate and environmental justice, that must be asked of each of us each and every single day. It's what our environment asks of us. Think about that for a moment. In your everyday interactions with the nature and the environment in which you come in contact with, what does it ask of you? And what do we give it back? According to my faith, I was taught that we are charged with the care and the creation of this earth. That was the charge that God gave to his people, to take care and to tend. In fact, that the prosperity and the success of the earth is tied to our own personal prosperity and success. It's almost like you give your kids a chore, and if they do it well, then you know they're reward for it. But if they don't, they sort of have to keep doing that same chore over and over and over again until they figure out how to get it right. And that's the same way that, from the perspective of my faith, I see the interactions with the environment and with the climate. It is, all right, I have given you this to take care of. Are you taking care of it, or are you using it up? Because it's depending upon you to do your job. And this is the job that I have assigned to you. And you do that job well, and then we all prosper together. You don't, and then we all have problems. Once again, that trust element, that is a human issue that we all have to deal with and have to acknowledge. How we do it equally and equitably, without fear, without reservation, without thought to the who, the what, the when, the why, the how, but doing it because it is the right thing to do, doing it because the success of being equitable to all people, to all ecosystems, to all systems means the success of us all, is something, once again, it's steeped in how we have come up culturally. So if you've come up in a culture where the identity of indigenous people was not respected, then you have to do some own self-work and dismantling of what you have thought has been the correct and right way to move forward with respect to environment and climate. Again, going back to the beginning, taking value in that 80% of the indigenous people that live right there on the front lines. So when they say the water is bad, there's not a question. We don't need to call in the PhD scientists from Harvard and MIT, and no offense to any of those people, but that should be a validation of what the people who are on the front lines, those indigenous communities who have lived there the entire time, it should be a validation to what they have already told us, not the other way around. And our systems of, unfortunately, racism in this country have turned it around. And so we have to dismantle that. It is key to how we will move forward. So I want to take us now into talking about what are these steps that we have to do to regain this connection, regain this trust. Because once again, we're on a timeline, and this is not to put anyone in, the idea of despair. We're all going to hell in a handbasket. That's not the purpose here. The purpose is a reckoning with what has to be done within a date and time certain. Okay, so I want to be clear about that. That is not to incite fear, that is to incite urgency to action. Okay, let's look now and turn to what are the steps that we need to take in order to ensure that we are moving forward in terms of rebuilding trust, but that we're also looking for and implementing culturally competent solutions that do not victimize the very people who have been on the front lines of these issues and who have historically and systemically suffered from the inadequacies of our systems of who we can trust and the people of who we can trust. Right? So let's talk about that for a minute. Let's sort of turn to that for a moment. The first step that we have to always acknowledge, and I think it is really the first step in anything in terms of getting to a place um, of dismantling inequities, is deep listening. It is deeply listening. That means you're going to, and we, in terms of our systems, have to not only listen to people who have experienced and really lived the travesties of environmental and climate justice, but we have to do it on more than one occasion. It's not just going to one meeting and listening to people complain, right? There will be that, because for anyone who has not been heard and you have the platform and the microphone, you want to get out everything that you wanted to say. And we have to listen. When we're listening, we're understanding not only the stories and the struggles that people have lived through, but have a moment to be empathetic to understanding how it impacts our lives. Every story is connected, every single one. I've talked before about how learning about environmentalism was identified for me. When I was a mayor working on water issues in my community, I never saw myself as an environmentalist. In my brain, environmentalism and environmentalists were white people who wore Birkenstocks and hugged trees and were vegan and walked around and talked about saving the frogs and the whales and the polar bears. And that was not me. I never saw myself because there were no images of myself as an environmentalist. There was no connectivity there. And so this entire time that I grew up and lived in an agrarian society, steps away from the Mississippi River, surrounded by environmental injustices as well as natural elements that really taught me about how there is a connection between faith and a connection between environment and a connection between nature and a connection to justice, I never saw myself identified as an environmentalist, because there were no images. When you Googled what does an environmentalist look like, you never saw anybody who looked like me. And that made me angry. So dealing with that emotion of anger, of wondering where I was in this picture, meant that somebody else needed that and to justice. All these things being connected showed me, really began to reveal how this whole time we've been thinking of climate change, environmental justice, education, healthcare as all these little boxes of social justice. When in reality, climate and environment is the table that all of the other boxes sit on. Because there's no way we're going to exist on this planet without air to breathe. You cannot go longer than 3 days without water. And whether you are on a boat or standing on land, it does need to be something that does not poison you, be it the water, be it being in the air or standing on land. So in order for us to even exist on this planet, we have to acknowledge what is taking place, whether it is making us sick or making us healthy, or if we're living in balance with it now, period. And so all of that, again, is the deep listening and understanding the connectivity between all of our stories, so that again, we're coming up with sound climate solutions that are culturally competent. So deep listening is one. The second step, I think, to rebuilding this trust is accountability. Some of the things that we need to say to one another, they're not easy to say. And some of the connections that we have to make for accountability to one another are not easy to do, but they still must be done. And they involve elements of our work that we often don't connect to climate. So example number one for us today is voting. Voter suppression in the United States is the number one biggest piece of climate legislation. I know you did not expect me to say that today, but it is. And the reason it is that because according to one Yale climate studies, but there are a number of studies that have been done. I'm just going to reflect on the Yale climate study. It was the one that was done in 2020. And there's still more studies that are being done constantly. But the demographic that is most likely to vote for climate policies, vote, support, and implement climate policies are Black and brown people. That study has been done over.
So we just lost Heather, and an incredibly important point. And let's see if she can get back on. Wow. I tell you what, while we're waiting for Heather to deal with the tech problems and Noah, I think it'd be great to see if she can record. Yeah, Danica, I think she is extraordinary. I'm going to ask you all to consider what she's set up to this point and to begin to formulate important questions to ask her, and maybe even put those questions in the chat stream right now while we have time as she's figuring out her tech. I hope we haven't lost her, the connection. And I'm gonna I'm gonna email her. And Noah, are you on?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Great. Yeah, I can. Could you write Heather, and maybe she has internet, and just see if you can get, an update. Decula's on, so we can take a pause if necessary. But Heather just really hit, an important section of what she's sharing. And that has to do with accountability, and voting rights is critical in this. And of course, as a Black woman, hearing her say the issue around voting rights that is so critical, that's going to be carried by Black and brown peoples, will really show up in terms of voting accessibility. It's just such an incredible point that she's made, a bridge. So we've got capitalists. Well, Heather says, I'm here. Okay, great. Not sure if I can see you yet, but your message is coming through. Oh, the power went out. Okay, you're on. There you are.
Can you see me? Okay, sorry. So, okay, we're on an island. Power went out. Back up is the phone.
We'll do this. Roshi, I was listening to what you were saying, and I was, you're so right. We're just getting into voting rights, and voting rights is sort of the issue that right now is a huge climate policy issue, because it will direct, quite frankly, what happens with respect to climate policy in the United States for the next generation. But right now, voter suppression laws that are in the process of being implemented all across this country are directly aligned with trying to stop Black and brown people from voting. That's just not an issue of inequality. That's an issue of directly attacking the people that we know will vote for climate policy, because they've already done it time and time again. A poll that was recently done showed that Black and brown people are more likely to not only vote for climate policy, but ask for equity across the board. So these are issues that we know we absolutely must have at the table and have to have answered right now if we're going to have this come forth. So I want to stop there, because I know we wanted to reserve some time for some questions. And Roshi, as you know, this is like one of my passionate topics that I could talk about all day and all night. But, I want to just sort of go back and stress from the very beginning that if we're going to get to a place of social justice, if we're going to get to a place of equity, if we're going to truly get to a place of climate equity and climate justice, we have to start with building the trust among our demographics and acknowledging and truly seeing the value for each of us that we have, and beginning to get to a place where we can look to one another the same way we look to that person we have on our sheet and that system that we have on our sheet, and say that, you know what, I know they're going to be consistent because they've done the same thing over and over and over again, and we can heal in that way as well as heal our planet. So I'll stop now for questions.
Oh, Heather, that is just, what you're bringing forth is so important for us to look at. But I'm going to ask you to just do one more thing. You have talked about steps to rebuilding trust and implementing culturally competent solutions that don't victimize people who are on the front lines, people who are on the ground doing the work or of the place. And you've mentioned two things. One is deep listening and doing it frequently. And also you brought up a really important point in this regard, which is dealing with one's own issues, including the sense of anger and helplessness that one experiences, but also dealing with one's biases and outing, if you will, one's blind spots. So this is, I think, this is something that we teach again and again in the socially engaged Buddhist training and in chaplaincy. So important. And then you talked about accountability not being easy. I would like for you to speak a little bit more about quotes, how one holds oneself and also others accountable. And the process for that, if you can reflect on that for us, because really we live in a morally outraged, primed society, a bunch of us are there, and which calls for accountability, but also is involved in a lot of shaming. So I just would love to hear you reflect on that a little bit more, if you will. And then if you could talk a little bit more to the steps to rebuilding trust.
Sure. No, I think that's a really good point, because, accountability is self-work. It's self-work. There's no way you can get around doing the work on yourself. In order for me to deal with my own issues of accountability and requiring myself to be accountable, it requires that I do the work. And all too often, especially with all the noise of media around us, we can be distracted by what someone else is saying and putting it off to somebody else and say that's their responsibility in terms of being accountable without doing the self-work. I'm right now in a space where I am taking a few days to be completely disconnected. I have not seen a television set in the past 2.5 days now, not connected to like the internet chatter and noise and things of what's going on, so that the things I'm hearing in my mind are, what am I doing? What is my responsibility? Not putting it off onto someone else. And I think, you know, doing that work part of now, getting ourselves into ourselves accountable, and as a result can find peaceful ways to encourage other people to take their own self-reflection. So it's not my job, you know, Roshi, to tell you, Roshi, you're a white woman, you go talk to other white women about how they need to be accountable. Like, that's not my job. My job is to hold myself accountable by sharing with you, this is my struggle and my story. And it would be helpful to me if you talk to other people that you come in contact with about this, you know, this struggle that I've had, and let's share this conversation. What can I do? You know, and to talk with one another in that way, I have found to me to be personally responsible. This is the other thing. I'm not responsible for your accountability, and you're not responsible for mine. And that relieves so much of the stress of trying to ask the question, you know, well, why won't this person or this system accept what is wrong? I have accepted the fact that everybody is not going to see the things the way that I see them. I have a responsibility to be accountable. It's not my job to demand that somebody else does. And I think that's another hard thing, because it comes to the point of, well, how in the world are we going to get anything done? Trust me when I say there's scripture, you know, that says, you know, it reflects, long story short, there are more of us, there are more that are with us than that are against us. And it's the story of the bones in the valley. But you, again, trusting in what we know, I have faith to know that there are more people like me and you than there are on the other side out there. There are more people who actually do want to see this environment succeed. They want to see their children grow up. They want to see all people have access to healthy, clean water. They don't want to see everything die off. There are more people who are like that and that are willing to take steps if we just sort of give them an edge to be doing. To your question, the steps of sort of building the trust, I said deep listening definitely is step one. Holding one another accountable is step two. And I hope I defined that a little bit better just now. Sort of holding yourself accountable, but that leads into all of us being accountable for what we do. And then I think the step three is finding place you can be active and actionable, not just watching what's happening as a bystander, but actively engaged in the solutions, finding the ways that you can actually engage in an equitable solution process. That does not look the same for everybody. When we think about movements, and even in the civil rights movement, right, you saw a lot of people out marching. Right? Black Lives Matter movement, the movements we've seen over the past 2 to 3 years, the visualizations that we have seen have been what has been presented by the media, people who are out physically on the front lines no matter what. And that has become our idea of what active engagement is. But in reality, even during the civil rights movement, there were multitudes of layers to getting to where we were seeking to be. Somebody was marching, but somebody else was at home watching the kids. People were out marching, but somebody had cooked and made sure that there was food for folks when they got back home. You saw the people on the front lines, but somebody was working and donating to make sure that there was bail money for folks when they needed to get out, because that was their job. Somebody, you saw the people who were out there marching, but somebody was actually back washing all the clothes. Somebody was at home watching the houses to make sure that nothing else happened while the other people were out front. And the point is that everybody has a role to play. You need to figure out what yours is. It may not be on that front line giving the news media news media interview. You may not be the one who's standing up, who's got the bullhorn, who's protesting. You may very well be the one that's responsible for making sure that every single week there's a donation that goes in, so the people who need to get out are getting out. And we need you to have a job to be able to do that. You know, you could be the very person that is putting together the packages, care packages, informational pamphlets. You may be the social media person that's making sure that the Twitter handle or that the Facebook images or that, you know, the TikTok videos or whatever are getting out and seen around the world. Find your job, get into that role and do it well. And when all of us are taking our own role in what needs to be done, then we can see the collective whole coming together. But if everybody's running around trying to figure out, oh my God, I'm supposed to be doing this, I don't know how to do this, that's not my anointing, don't walk in something that's not your ministry. Figure out what it is that you do well, and then get into that space and you flourish in it. And I think those things come together. They help us to not only build trust, but really identify in our own persons what it is we're supposed to be doing. I know it's truly helped me, and it helps to relieve the stress and anxiety of doing too much. I know what I'm good at and what I'm not. I am not going to try to put myself into a lane of something that I cannot do. But it's very helpful in making sure that the things that I can do are effective.
That is just gorgeous, Heather. Thank you. Boy, as Rhonda said, preach and maybe receive. Oh gosh, I feel like it's Sunday morning. So what I want to do is I'd like us actually to take a few questions from they're in some great ones in the chat stream. If you would raise your hand, because it's nice to see your face and not just Heather's and my face, and to put out, you know, your questions for us. So put your little hand, don't be shy. we need you. Great. So, Justin.
Hi, Heather. I just want to thank you for everything that you're doing. And I've been a longtime activist, or what we're calling an engaged Buddhist. And, you know, I've worked on everything from the Bernie Sanders campaigns to working with the Sunrise Movement to, you know, all these different things. And I think, like you said, it's sometimes easy to become frustrated because we can feel like even though what we're doing personally is not contributing enough, especially given what the scientists are saying about ever decreasing timeline. You know, it was 15 years, now we're down to, I live in California, you know, we're being burnt up by wildfires, droughts, you name it, right? And so I think that one of the things, and I wonder if you agree, is that I see that our economic system of capitalism has really, you know, since the Industrial Revolution, you know, going back to the 1800s, has really been kind of the progenitor of many of the problems that we see today. And that, you know, that includes slavery, it includes genocide of indigenous peoples, it includes, you know, greed, selfishness, and what your thoughts are on about capitalism and as part of this movement, trying to move us away, well, either to a kinder capitalism in a transition or to a different economic system that treats people differently, including the planet and the environment.
No, great question.
Yes.
Heather, what's your take?
Yeah, That's a very good question, and it's one that a lot of folks are grappling with in a couple of different ways. So let's try to give you my take on it real quick. You pointed out the Industrial Revolution as sort of one of those linchpins of when we're seeing a shift in capitalism. I think we're on the cusp of another one, really shifting to sort of a, a green revolution. The onset of coronavirus, along with reckoning with racial and systemic issues of racial injustice and technology, have really put us into a place where we are seeing major shifts in terms of what will be the next big thing that's going to be a huge capitalistic opportunity. The difference, though, right now is because of this racial reckoning, there is an opportunity for us to take advantage of this green revolution that we didn't have before. It's why there's such an encouragement to see people of color not just put into the box of just getting a good green job. No, creating the entire systems that now give us the opportunity to create green Silicon Valleys in Houston, Texas, or in the Mississippi Delta versus just Silicon Valley as we know it right now. There are shifts that are afoot, but it is a very important time to demand that there be equity, because people do not give up their power and their money very easily. And so what we're trying to show here is that, to some extent, working on capitalist ideals it's not bad. It's just the issue of it being fair. And the issue of fairness and equity doesn't necessarily always mean that you're taking someone else's piece of the pie. We're talking about creating a whole new pie and how it gets sliced up. So these are the things that I think are being discussed right now. There's a lot of conversation, everything from the SEC and what publicly traded companies have to now consider with respect to climate risks, to how we're seeing philanthropy change and focus on climate versus maybe some of the other issues they've been focused on in the past, and adding an equitable lens to that. So I think there's some major shifts that are afoot. The real test will be to see if we're able to not only take advantage of them, but really make transformational change that is dismantling some of the very racist policies that have prevented people from moving forward in the past.
Thank you so much, Heather. Such an important point. The transfer, and Justin for bringing up the issues around our economic systems. I'm going to ask, so we can just take a few more questions. Kuya, and if you guys would just go to Essence, because we do want to take a break in just a few minutes. So Kuya, welcome.
Thank you, Roshi. Nice to see you again. I'm just going to read what is very quick. So Creston, where I live, is a rural farming community, population 5,000, where injustice issues are not so obvious. For example, we have one homeless person, good community food coalition, so it's hard to identify the hungry. The local First Nations is strongly speaking for itself, nor would I presume to do so. Our immigrant group is small and supported by our immigration committee. How can the issue of racial, economic, and social justice be raised in a community like this that has local impact?
I think that I love that question, number one. I love to see communities like that. If you don't mind me asking, what's the racial demographic of the community? Is it mostly indigenous? Because I heard you say there was a very strong indigenous.
No, there's an indigenous, there's a reservation which is very well managed. And there's a very small immigrant population. We're mostly white, conservative, right-wing Christian with a small element of contemplative thinkers.
Okay. So here's what I see as being an opportunity, and that is we are, because of again, going back to COVID, we have seen across the country how people are moving to places where they are finding they can work from any place in the world. They're finding places that identify very close to what they believe or what they think, or places where they just feel freer to be who they think that they are. That can be good, bad, or indifferent. And we've seen sort of all three. I think the way to sort of address this issue of why do we need to worry about racial inequity when we're in a community that is not bothering us, is not touching us. And when we have that conversation, is one about our children. That's how I'm just telling you how I framed it. I framed it in the way to say, that's good for right now. What happens in 15 to 20 years? Are the children who live in that community going to remain there? What is going to be the next steps for the community? What does the community planning look like? And if it has been done in a way that is not inclusive of what I think the future of a community could look like, then do ourselves a disservice to not at least acknowledge how we move forward on an equitable space. You also have to think about and talk about in that community what happens when you're outside of the quote unquote four invisible walls of that community. What happens when people are trading those farming goods that they create in their own spaces? Are they limited in any way by I would say the external issues of race and inequity? Is that small farming community or for the products that are coming off of it, have they ever been asked, do you have a non-discriminatory clause in anything you're doing? Like, these are the kind of little things that people don't think about, but they come and they hit them. And it's like all of a sudden, well, we've never had to think about that. Seeing ourselves as part of a collective versus being in a bubble is very important for, I think, the future development of all of our communities, whether they're big, small, or indifferent.
Beautiful. Beautiful, Heather. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think one of the things that is really up for us to look at is what is the degree of our privilege? How are we exercising it, and how are we dismantling it?
Absolutely. And who does it impact? Because, one of the things about privilege is you sort of privileged not have to think about the privilege. It's not until it's raised as an issue that we actually have to come face to face with it. And everybody does. Often, even when it's privilege is categorized into, there's white privilege, there's Black privilege, believe it or not, as well, that we deal with in our own communities. But the larger systemic problems, I think, is what we're talking about here. What has the system created that everyone does not have access to, that you may not even reflect on? Just, a moment ago, we were talking about economics, access to capital. Just the access to capital that as a result of racist housing policies in the 50s and 60s. So when my grandfather got back from World War II and got that same amount of money that the white World War II Army guys got, they could go buy a house in a certain wherever they wanted to. My grandfather could not. He was limited to the space, the location, the neighborhood that he could buy in. He could not take my grandmother and go buy a house in some suburban area. No, they were on the west side of Baltimore, Maryland, because that's where Black folks could buy a house. And that was not as a result of what he wanted. That was a result of the actual federal policy and the permitting policies on a local and a state level, and the restrictive housing covenants that took place that kept people out of spaces or didn't even allow them to buy houses at all. So the very idea of the one thing that a lot of Americans use as a capitalistic way or a catalyst, quite frankly, for building wealth within their families, a lot of people didn't have access to. So if you don't know that just the privilege of the fact that your grandmother had a house, had property that they could leverage, that they could pass on to someone else, they could put up for credit for that business they wanted to do, that other people didn't even have access to that same that same dynamic, it puts us in a place of privilege. But that's a part of dismantling some of this structure that allows us to get to a place of equity on an economic scale as well as on an environmental scale.
Whew. Thank you. That really summarized it in such an extraordinary way. So Randall and Samantha, I want to be mindful of time. And if you can hold your questions until after Decula's presentation, is that okay, Randall? I'm seeing your head nod. Thank you, Randall. And Samantha, good. So it is 11:10. I'd like to invite us to take a 10-minute break, just stretch, step away from your computer. And if you can, like I am able, step outside and let yourself take in whatever horizon is before you. And then we will meet at 11:20 sharply when Decula will begin. Thank you so much, Heather. And, we broke into Heather's rest period, so forgive us.
It's okay.
I'm
email.
so sorry, but
Folks may have some more questions. You feel free to email me and I will do my best to get back to you. But I hope everyone has a beautiful rest of this moment together.
Right. Thank you so much, Heather. I'll ask you if you really want me to share your email with.
I already did. I already put it in that.
Okay, there you are. You got more nerve than I do. Okay, we'll see you at 11:20. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Just love you so much. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Bye-bye.